The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah Mitchell stumbled across the parched earth, her lips cracked and hope fading. Her wagon abandoned miles back, she clutched the lead rope of her last possession, a brown-eyed Jersey cow. Through the heat shimmer, she spotted a figure by the creek, a man whose proud shoulders seemed permanently bent toward the earth, his legs motionless beneath a worn blanket. When their eyes met, she saw not weakness, but a dignified strength that stirred something deep within her soul. Little did she know that Tall Feather, once his tribe's most celebrated warrior, possessed ancient wisdom that would transform her life. His paralyzed body concealed a spirit more powerful than any she had encountered in the so-called civilized world she'd left behind. Could a woman who had lost everything find her true purpose in the eyes of a man whom society deemed broken? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell had never imagined herself here, lost in the vastness of the Western Territories, with only a cow for company. At 45, her once auburn hair now streaked with silver, she'd left Boston 3 months ago with dreams that seemed foolish in hindsight. The locket around her neck held all that remained of her previous life. A small portrait of Thomas, her husband of 20 years, and their infant son James, both claimed by influenza 2 winters past. The wagon train had been her chance at reinvention. Go west, her sister had urged. The past can't follow you across the mountains. But the past wasn't what had stranded her here. It was a broken axle, spooked horses, and a water keg that had split open on the rocky ground 3 days ago. Sarah's fingers absently found the locket as she trudged forward, Bessie the cow plodding faithfully behind. The Jersey had been Thomas's last gift purchased, just before the sickness took him. Every farm needs a good milk cow, he'd said with characteristic practicality. Now Bessie was Sarah's only companion and final lifeline. Just a little farther, girl, Sarah murmured, though she had no destination in mind. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched. The last sip of water had been yesterday morning, carefully measured from her dented canteen dot when she saw the fin. Wisp of smoke rising beyond the next ridge, Sarah hesitated. The stories of hostile natives had circulated freely among the wagon train, tales told by men who carried rifles and spoke with absolute certainty about things they'd never witnessed. But thirst made the decision for her. We don't have the luxury of fear, she told Bessie, tugging gently on the lead rope. Sarah approached cautiously, staying close to a line of scrub brush for cover. The dwelling was unlike anything she'd expected, not a tent of animal hides, but a thoughtfully constructed shelter of wood, stone, and earth that blended into the landscape. A small garden of unfamiliar plants grew in carefully tended rows nearby. The man sat with his back to her, working with his hands on some kind of basket. His long black hair, streaked with gray, was tied back with a leather cord. He wore a simple buckskin shirt, and a blanket covered his lower half despite the heat. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, snapping a twig beneath her boot. The man turned, his movements swift despite being seated. His weathered face showed no surprise, as though he'd known of her presence all along. His eyes, dark and intelligent, assessed her without fear or hostility, just careful observation. "Hello," Sarah said, her voice cracking from thirst. "I'm lost." The man didn't respond verbally, but gestured toward a clay pot near the fire. Water. Sarah restrained herself from rushing forward, maintaining what dignity she could. "Thank you," she said, leading Bessie closer. "My name is Sarah Mitchell." The man watched as she approached, his gaze shifting between her face and the cow. With deliberate movements, he pointed to himself and spoke a single word, "Tall Feather." Sarah nodded and accepted the ladle he offered, filling it from the pot. The water was cool, and tasted faintly of minerals. She drank slowly, knowing too much too quickly would make her sick. Only after she'd had her fill did she think to water Bessie. Looking questioningly at Tall Feather, he nodded once and pointed to a small stream that ran behind his dwelling. Sarah led Bessie there, relief washing over her as the cow drank deeply. She returned. Tall Feather had placed a wooden bowl containing some kind of stew near the fire. He gestured for her to sit, maintaining a respectful distance. No words passed between them as Sarah accepted the food, but in the silence, something fundamental was exchanged, an acknowledgement of shared humanity in an unforgiving land. Tall Feather had watched the white woman's approach for nearly an hour before she noticed his dwelling. In his 62 summers, he had learned that observation revealed more truth than words ever could. The woman moved with determination, despite her obvious exhaustion. She cared for the cow even when her own needs were great. These were good signs. When she finally stood before him, he saw the mix of wariness and desperation in her eyes, a look he recognized from his own reflection in still waters. 5 years had passed since the day his legs had failed him. 5 years since he had chosen solitude over becoming a burden to his people. As the woman watered her cow, Tall Feather adjusted his position, carefully moving his useless legs with his hands. The injury had come during a raid by a rival tribe, fall from a great height that had broken his back, but not his spirit. The tribal healer had saved his life, but could not restore his legs. "Your path has changed," the old man had told him, "but your journey continues." Tall Feather touched the medicine pouch that hung around his neck, a small leather bag containing sacred herbs, an eagle feather, and stones that connected him to his ancestors. The spirits had guided him to this place with its hidden spring of healing waters. Here he had built a new life, one where his knowledge of plants and healing compensated for his physical limitations. He watched the woman, Sarah, as she returned from the stream. Her movements were tentative but respectful. She did not enter his space carelessly like most whites he had encountered. When she ate the stew he offered, she did so with gratitude rather than suspicion. Another good sign. Night approached rapidly as they sat in silence. With practiced movements, Tall Feather lit the small fire pit using dried brush and a flint striker. The flames cast dancing shadows across the dwelling's walls, where his various tools and medicines hung. Each item had been carefully positioned within his reach from a seated position. "Sleep," he said in English, one of the few words he had learned during his occasional trades with white settlers. He pointed to a flat area near the fire, but not too close to his own sleeping place. Sarah nodded, clearly understanding. From her bag, she removed a thin blanket and arranged it on the ground. Tall Feather noticed how she positioned herself between him and her cow, protective of the animal despite her vulnerable situation. As darkness settled fully around them, Tall Feather performed his evening ritual, softly chanting prayers to the spirits while adding specific herbs to the fire. The sweet, earthy aroma filled the dwelling. He sensed Sarah watching him, but continued without self-consciousness. This was his way, as natural to him as breathing. Later, when her breathing had slowed into sleep, Tall Feather moved himself to the dwelling's entrance. The stars above were particularly bright, and the moon cast a silver glow across the landscape. He knew so intimately. Winter would arrive soon. He could feel it in the changing air, and see it in the behavior of the animals and plants around his home. His preparations were behind schedule this year. A fever had claimed nearly 2 weeks of his time during the late summer, and some tasks were difficult to complete alone. The woman's arrival was unexpected, but perhaps not unwelcome. The spirits often provided when needs arose. Tall Feather glanced back at the sleeping form of Sarah Mitchell. Tomorrow would reveal more about this strange white woman and whether the spirits had sent her as a blessing or a test. He had survived both before. With practiced movements, He pulled himself back to his sleeping mat. Before closing his eyes, he reached for a small wooden flute beside his bed. The instrument had been his companion in loneliness, giving voice to thoughts he shared with no one. Tonight, he simply held it, finding comfort in its familiar form. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Sarah woke to a world transformed. The clear sky of yesterday had vanished, replaced by an ominous yellow-brown haze. Wind whipped around. The dwelling, carrying fine particles that stung the eyes and clogged the throat. "Dust storm," Tall Feather said, startling her with his use of English. He sat at the entrance, securing a woven mat across the opening with practiced movements. Sarah scrambled to her feet. "Bessie, cow inside." Tall Feather pointed to the rear of the dwelling where, to Sarah's relief, Bessie stood in a small attached lean-to, looking unperturbed. "Thank you," Sarah said, genuinely moved by his foresight. The wind intensified, howling like a living thing. Dust filtered through every tiny crack in the dwelling. Sarah pulled her handkerchief over her nose and mouth. Tall Feather did the same, with a piece of cloth, and gestured for Sarah to help secure another mat over a second opening. As she moved to assist, Sarah noticed for the first time that Tall Feather didn't stand. Instead, he pulled himself along with his arms, his legs dragging behind him. The realization struck her suddenly he couldn't walk. Her face must have betrayed her thoughts because Tall Feather's expression hardened. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, then immediately regretted it. The proud man before her didn't want pity. Tall Feather nodded once, acknowledging her understanding rather than her apology. He pointed to the mat, redirecting her attention to the task at hand. Together, they secured the dwelling against the storm, Tall Feather directing with gestures, and occasional English words mixed with Apache. Though his vocabulary was limited, his intelligence was evident in his resourcefulness and careful planning. The dwelling had been designed to withstand such storms, with multiple layers of protection available. By midday, the storm had transformed into a blinding tempest. In the dim light filtered through the dust-covered mats, Sarah and Tall Feather sat facing each other across the small fire he had carefully maintained. The broken water keg from Sarah's wagon sat between them. She had dragged it along on a travois made from wagon parts, hoping to repair it somehow. Tall Feather examined it with interest, pointing to the split wood and making a mending motion. "Can you fix it?" Sarah asked, not expecting him to understand fully. To her surprise, Tall Feather nodded. "Tomorrow, after storm." Sarah smiled, then impulsively reached for a stick and smoothed a patch of dirt between them. She drew a simple picture of a wagon with a broken wheel. "My wagon," she explained, pointing to herself, then the drawing. "Broken." Tall Feather considered this, then took the stick. Beside her drawing, he sketched a rough map indicating their current location, then made marks in several directions. "Wagon people," he said, pointing to one set of marks. "Many days." He held up 4 fingers. Sarah understood the nearest wagon train or settlement was 4 days' journey away. Her heart sank. Tall Feather watched her reaction, then added another mark closer to their position. "Trading post, 2 days." He held up 2 fingers. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "When the storm ends, I should go there?" Tall Feather's face remained impassive, but his eyes held concern. He pointed outside, made a sweeping motion, then pointed to several items damaged by previous storms. Sarah understood his warning. The storm would leave destruction in its wake, making travel difficult. Looking around the dwelling, she noticed supplies had been organized for the coming winter, but many seemed inadequate. Several baskets remained unfinished, and dried food stores appeared smaller than would be necessary for the harsh season ahead. The realization came to her slowly. Tall Feather had fallen behind in his preparations. Whether from illness or the limitations of his condition, He faced the coming winter with insufficient provisions. And now, the storm would surely destroy much of his external work. Sarah met his eyes across the fire and made a decision that would change both their lives. "I will help you," she said, gesturing to the dwelling and then outside. "After the storm, before I go." Tall Feather studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, with dignity that moved her deeply, he nodded once in acceptance. The storm raged for 2 days before finally surrendering to clear skies. When Sarah first stepped outside, the landscape had been transformed sand drifts piled against the dwelling, debris scattered across Tall Feather's carefully tended garden, and the small irrigation channels he had engineered were completely filled with dust and sand. Tall Feather emerged behind her, pulling himself along on a simple wooden board with handles, a device Sarah now recognized as his primary means of outdoor mobility. His face remained stoic as he surveyed the damage, but Sarah caught the slight slump of his shoulders. "We'll start with the garden," she said decisively, already moving toward the damaged plots. Tall Feather watched her for a moment, then positioned himself near a row of what appeared to be medicinal herbs. With methodical precision, he began clearing away the sand and straightening bent stems. Sarah followed his example in the next row, occasionally glancing over to ensure she was doing it correctly. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and Sarah paused to wipe sweat from her brow. Tall Feather had worked steadily despite the heat, his movements efficient and purposeful. Watching him, Sarah was struck by how he had adapted to his disability, using upper body strength and ingenious tools to accomplish tasks that would challenge even someone with full mobility. She returned to her water canteen, only to find it empty. Before she could ask, Tall Feather pointed to the clay pot near the dwelling's entrance. Sarah filled her canteen gratefully, then noticed Bessie standing in the shade, looking uncomfortable. "She needs milking," Sarah said, more to herself than to Tall Feather, and an idea struck her. "Milk," she said louder, pointing to Bessie. "Food, good." Tall Feather looked at the cow with new interest. Sarah retrieved the small wooden bucket from her belongings and approached Bessie. The cow, accustomed to daily milking, stood patiently as Sarah worked. When she finished, she brought the foaming bucket to Tall Feather. He hesitated, looking from the milk to Sarah's face. "Please," she said, offering the bucket. "Take some." Still, he didn't move. Sarah realized suddenly that pride was holding him back. He didn't want charity from a stranger, especially not a white woman. "Trade," she said firmly, setting the bucket down and gesturing to the dwelling, the garden, the repaired water keg. "I help you. You help me. We trade." Understanding flickered in Tall Feather's eyes. Slowly, he reached for a small wooden cup, hanging near the entrance, and dipped it into the bucket. He sipped cautiously, then nodded in appreciation. "Good trade," he said, the hint of a smile touching his lips. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Tall Feather reached for a pouch and withdrew a handful of seeds. He separated them into small piles, then began a patient explanation using a mixture of English words, Apache terms, and gestures. Sarah understood he was teaching her about planting schedules for the coming weeks. She listened intently, occasionally, repeating words to commit them to memory. When she correctly identified one of the plants by its Apache name, Tall Feather's eyebrows raised slightly, a sign of approval that pleased her more than it should have. Later, noticing Sarah's sunburned skin, Tall Feather mixed a paste from plants in his medicine pouch. He held it out, pointing to her reddened arms and face. "Help burn," he said. Sarah applied the cooling mixture, sighing with relief as it soothed her raw skin. "Thank you," she said. "What is it made from?" Tall Feather pointed to a plant growing near the stream. Tomorrow, Sarah realized, he would teach her about his medicines, That night, as Sarah settled onto her blanket, she found herself thinking not of the trading post 2 days away, but of all there was to learn here. Bessie's milk had created a bridge between them, a fair exchange that preserved Tall Feather's dignity while providing nutrition. He clearly needed. Sarah glanced at her cow, silhouetted against the dwelling wall. "You're earning your keep, old girl," she whispered. Tomorrow, she would help Tall Feather rebuild the irrigation channels. The trading post could wait another day, or perhaps even 2. 1 week stretched into 2, and still Sarah found reasons to postpone her journey to the trading post. Each morning brought new tasks: repairing irrigation channels, harvesting late-season plants, preserving food for winter. Each evening brought new knowledge, as Tall Feather shared his understanding of the desert's rhythms and resources. On this particular morning, Sarah observed Tall Feather struggling with his travois, the wooden sled he used to move across longer distances. The leather bindings had frayed, and one of the wooden rails had developed a crack. "May I?" she asked, pointing to the travois. Tall Feather hesitated, then nodded, surrendering the essential tool. Sarah examined it carefully, noting how his design compensated for his paralysis. The craftsmanship was impressive, but she saw opportunities for improvement. "I can make it better," she said, looking to him for permission. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held a question. Sarah sketched her ideas in the dirt: wider rails for stability, padded handles to prevent blisters, a small raised edge to prevent items from falling off. Tall Feather studied her drawing, then added his own modifications: a different binding technique for the leather, a slight curve to the front to better navigate rough terrain. Their heads bent close together over the design, language barriers falling away in the shared language of practical problem-solving. By midday, they had dismantled the old travois and begun constructing the new one. Sarah marveled at Tall Feather's knowledge of woods, how he selected different types for different purposes, curing some with fire, others with water. For his part, Tall Feather seemed impressed by Sarah's practical innovations, nodding approval at her suggestion to add a small storage compartment beneath the main platform. "Boston husband," Sarah explained, as she demonstrated a particular knot. "Shipbuilder." Tall Feather watched her hands, and repeated the knot perfectly. "Good husband," he said. "Teach well," Sarah smiled at the simple truth of it. "Yes, good husband." As they worked, Sarah noticed how Tall Feather rarely mentioned his ability, never complained of pain or limitation. He had simply adapted, creating tools and techniques that worked with his body rather than against it. His dignity in the face of what many would consider a devastating condition humbled her. The next morning, they tested the new travois at the creek, where Tall Feather demonstrated his fishing technique. Using a specially designed spear with a detachable head, he caught 2 fish in quick succession, his upper body strength and accuracy compensating for his inability to wade into the water. Sarah's attempts were laughably poor in comparison. Her first thrust missed completely, sending her stumbling forward into the shallows. Her second caught only mud from the creek bottom. Tall Feather's laugh surprised her, a rich, deep sound that transformed his usually solemn face. "Like this," he said, adjusting her grip and stance. His hands were warm against hers, calloused but gentle in their guidance. On her third attempt, Sarah speared a small fish. Triumph surged through her as she held it up, dripping and wriggling. "Good," Tall Feather said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now again." That evening, they shared the fish with wild rice Tall Feather had collected and stored. The meal was simple but satisfying. As darkness fell, Sarah found herself studying her companion in the firelight. The lines of his face told stories of hardship and wisdom. The strength in his shoulders spoke of years adapting to his condition. Most compelling were his eyes, dark, intelligent, and increasingly warm when they rested on her. "Teach words," he said suddenly, gesturing between them. "You teach English. I teach Apache." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Yes, good idea." They began that night with simple nouns: fire, water, fish, sky. Each word exchanged felt like another bridge built between their worlds. Sarah went to sleep with Apache, words dancing in her head, no longer thinking of wagon trains or trading posts or the life she had left behind. For the first time in years, she looked forward to tomorrow. By the light of the evening fire, Sarah began keeping a journal. Using precious paper and pencil from her remaining supplies, she documented Tall Feather's teachings, medicinal plants, weather predictions, survival techniques. Each entry combined practical knowledge with personal reflection, creating a record of not just information but transformation. "What words?" Tall Feather asked, watching her pencil move across the page. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to explain. "Medicine plants," she said finally, showing him a careful drawing of a desert herb he had taught her to identify. "I remember." Tall Feather studied the page, his expression guarded. "Why write?" The question caught Sarah off guard. How could? She explained the settler's compulsion to document, catalog, possess through knowledge. "To learn," she said simply. "To respect." Something in her tone must have reassured him, because Tall Feather nodded slowly. He reached for the pencil, and Sarah surrendered it, curious. With unexpected precision, he added details to her drawing: the pattern of veins in the leaf, the specific arrangement of stems. "Important," he said, pointing to these details. "For medicine." Sarah understood then that his concern wasn't with her documentation, but with its accuracy. This wasn't casual knowledge to be approximately recorded. These were sacred teachings that had sustained his people for generations. "Teach me properly," she said, meeting his eyes. "I will write carefully." Over the next days, their lessons took on new significance. Tall Feather began sharing more specialized knowledge, how certain plants must be harvested only at specific times, how prayers accompanied the gathering of medicine, how some remedies required not just physical ingredients, but spiritual intention. Sarah recorded everything faithfully, often reading entries back to Tall Feather to ensure accuracy. Their shared vocabulary expanded rapidly, a hybrid language emerging between them, part English, part Apache, part their own unique shorthand. One morning, as Sarah sorted recently gathered herbs, she was startled by voices approaching the dwelling. Tall Feather tensed, then relaxed as he recognized the sounds. "My people," he explained, moving toward the entrance. 3 Apache men appeared, leading pack horses laden with supplies. They stopped abruptly at the sight of Sarah, hands moving to weapons. Rapid conversation in Apache followed, with Tall Feather's calm voice contrasting with the visitor's sharp tones. Sarah remained perfectly still, acutely aware of being an intruder in their eyes. She caught repeated words that seemed to refer to her white woman, and another term she didn't recognize. Finally, Tall Feather gestured for her to approach. "Friends," he said in English, "bring winter supplies." The oldest of the visitors, a man with a deeply lined face and ceremonial paint marking his cheeks, studied Sarah with undisguised suspicion. He spoke directly to her in halting English. "Why white woman here? Many white soldiers search East lands, bring trouble." Sarah felt cold dread at his words. Soldiers searching likely meant conflict somewhere, borders being contested, treaties being broken. She shook her head firmly. "No trouble," she said. "Help Tall Feather, learn medicine, no soldiers." The elder turned to Tall Feather, speaking rapidly in Apache. Sarah caught only fragments, but the concern was clear her presence brought risk, especially with tensions rising between their peoples. Tall Feather responded with quiet dignity, gesturing once to Sarah and then to the organized dwelling, the well-tended garden, the stored provisions. He seemed to be explaining her contributions, defending her presence. The elder listens, then approached Sarah. From a pouch at his waist, He withdrew something and held it before her, a small carved stone in the shape of a turtle. "You know this?" he asked. Sarah looked to Tall Feather, who nodded encouragement. "Medicine stone," she said, remembering their lessons. "For heart healing." The elder's eyebrows rose. He exchanged a glance with Tall Feather, then returned the stone to his pouch. "She learns," he acknowledged, "but winter comes. White woman should return to white people before snow." After the visitors departed, leaving supplies and warnings in equal measure, an uncomfortable silence fell between Sarah and Tall Feather. The journal lay open between them, suddenly a symbol of divided loyalties. "I should go," Sarah said finally, the elder's warning echoing in her mind. Tall Feather didn't immediately respond. When he did, his words were careful, measured. "Your choice," he said. "Always your choice." That night, Sarah wrote in her journal by moonlight, wrestling with the decision that seemed increasingly complicated with each passing day. The sound of distant voices woke Sarah before dawn. She rose quickly, moving to the dwelling's entrance, where Tall Feather already sat, alert and listening. "White men," he said quietly, "searching." Sarah's heart pounded as she peered through the early morning mist. In the distance, several figures on horseback moved across the landscape, calling a name. With a jolt, she realized they were calling her name. "Sarah Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell." They were from her wagon train, a search party that hadn't given up hope of finding her. For a moment, relief flooded through her. Then she glanced at Tall Feather, whose face remained impassive, but whose eyes held a question he wouldn't voice. "I should hide," she whispered, surprising herself with the decision. Tall Feather studied her face, then nodded once. He pointed to a small storage space dug into the dwelling's rear wall, partially concealed by hanging dried plants. Sarah crawled inside just as the voices grew closer. Through a small gap in the covering, she watched as two men approached the dwelling. They called out in English, hands near their weapons, as Tall Feather emerged, presenting himself as unthreatening. "Looking for white woman," one man said loudly, as if volume could overcome the language barrier. "Woman with cow. You see?" Tall Feather shook his head slowly. The men exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "Mind if we look around, Chief?" the second man asked, already moving toward the dwelling. Tall Feather didn't respond, but made no move to stop them. Sarah held her breath as they ducked inside, boots heavy on the packed earth floor. They examined the space cursorily, commenting on the strange Indian fixings, but showing no real interest in understanding the dwelling's contents. "Waste of time," the first man muttered. "She's probably dead in a ravine somewhere." "Or taken by a different band," the second replied. "Either way, we've done our duty. Captain says we head back tomorrow." They exited, tossing a few more questions at Tall Feather, who maintained his stoic silence. Finally, they mounted their horses and rode away, their voices fading into the distance. Sarah remained hidden until Tall Feather called her name softly. She emerged, dust clinging to her skirts, emotions churning. "They search for you," Tall Feather said. "Your people." "Yes," Sarah acknowledged, unable to explain why she had chosen concealment over rescue. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, each lost in private thoughts. Finally, Tall Feather reached for something beside his sleeping, mat, a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a magnificent eagle feather, its shaft decorated with intricate beadwork. "For you," he said, holding it out. Sarah accepted it with reverence, understanding its significance from their conversations about Áłchíní culture. Eagle feathers were sacred, given only to those who had earned great respect. "Why?" she asked. Tall Feather's eyes held hers. "You choose to stay. Free choice." He gestured to the direction the searchers had gone. "Could go. Safe with them. But stay," the simple truth of it moved her deeply. She had chosen this place, this man, this life. That was forming between them, not from desperation or lack of options, but from genuine preference. That afternoon, they ventured farther from the dwelling than usual, Tall Feather leading the way on his improved travois. He guided her to a hidden canyon where a small spring bubbled from rock walls, creating a microclimate of unexpected lushness. Secret place, he explained. Good water. Sarah dipped her hands into the clear pool, surprised by its pleasant warmth. Special, she agreed. Tall Feather nodded. Holy water, healing. As they sat beside the spring, sharing dried meat and berries, their hands touched briefly. Neither pulled away. The contact was brief but deliberate, acknowledgement of something growing between them that transcended their differences. The eagle feather now tucked safely in Sarah's. Hair caught the sunlight as she bent to drink from the spring. In its reflection on the water's surface, she saw not just herself, but the woman she was becoming, someone stronger, wiser, and more truly alive than the proper Bostonian widow who had joined the wagon train months ago. That night, as they sat by the fire, the comfortable silence between them held new meaning. Words from both their languages now flowed more easily, but some things required no translation at all. The healing spring became their sanctuary. Each morning Sarah carried water from it in clay pots back to the dwelling. Her hands, once soft from Boston society life, had grown calloused from labor, but remained painfully cracked from the dry desert air. After several days of watching her discomfort, Tall Feather gestured for her to submerge her hands directly. In the spring, hold long, he instructed. Water knows hurt. Sarah obeyed, skeptical but willing. The warm water tingled against her skin, and when she withdrew her hands after several minutes, she was astonished to find the cracks visibly diminished, the pain significantly reduced. How is this possible? She asked, examining her healing. Skin. Tall Feather's eyes crinkled at her amazement. Not all medicine in plants, he explained. Earth gives healing too. Water remembers old ways. Sarah had encountered patent medicines and doctors' treatments in Boston, but nothing had worked with such gentle efficiency. Your people have always known about this place? Tall Feather nodded. Many generations, sacred place. He hesitated, then added, few know now, secret kept. Sarah understood the honor of being shown this place, the trust it represented. Thank you, she said simply. Working together, they designed an irrigation system that would bring water from the regular stream to Tall Feather's garden without revealing the location of the healing spring. Sarah's practical knowledge of water flow, combined with Tall Feather's understanding of the land, created something neither could have achieved alone. As they worked, Tall Feather began sharing more about his past. In halting English supplemented, with gestures and drawings, he told her about his wife, Morning Sky, and their son, who had both died from smallpox, brought by white traders 15 years earlier. Many died, he said, his eyes distant with memory. Not just my family, many families. Sarah sat beside him, her own grief resonating with his. My husband Thomas and our son James died of influenza, she said softly, 2 winters ago. Tall Feather nodded in understanding. Death comes to all people, he said. Apache, white, all same in this. Yes, Sarah agreed. All the same in loss. That evening, Tall Feather showed Sarah how to use clay from near the spring to make a poultice for Bessie's udder, which had become irritated. As they worked side by side, their shoulders occasionally touching, Sarah found herself studying his hands, strong, skilled, gentle in their movements. You were important to your people, she observed. Before your injury. Tall Feather continued applying the poultice, but nodded. Medicine man, also warrior. And now? Sarah asked cautiously. His hands paused briefly. Now different path. Spirits. Decide. Do you miss your tribe, living with them? Tall Feather considered this. Miss some, not all. He glanced at her. Pride is heavy thing. Some see only broken man now. Sarah understood immediately. Rather than live as an object of pity among his own people, he had chosen solitude and independence. It was a choice that spoke to his character, his unwillingness to be defined by limitations. They're wrong, she said firmly. You're not broken. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude for her perception. He didn't respond verbally, but his hand briefly covered hers where it rested on Bessie's flank, a gesture more eloquent than words. The next morning, Tall Feather showed Sarah how to strengthen the dwelling for winter. Together they gathered additional materials to insulate the walls and roof. Working on the roof required Sarah to climb, while Tall Feather directed from below. The role reversal might have been difficult for some men to accept, but he showed no resentment, focusing instead on the practicality of their partnership. As Sarah secured the last bundle of insulating reeds, she looked out across the landscape, the vast desert with its hidden pockets of life, the distant mountains touched with early snow, the clear blue sky stretching endlessly in all directions. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt truly present, connected to the world around her, rather than merely surviving within it. Below, Tall Feather watched her, his face upturned, patient and attentive. In that moment, Sarah realized how completely her perception of him had transformed, no longer seeing his disability, but rather the extraordinary strength and wisdom that defined him. Night fell early as autumn deepened into winter. Sarah sat near the dwelling's entrance, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sound that drew her attention was so faint, at first she thought she imagined it a low, melodic whisper carried on the evening breeze. Following the sound, she rounded the corner of the dwelling to find Tall Feather seated on a flat rock, his face tilted toward the heavens. In his hands was a simple cedar flute, from which he coaxed a melody so haunting it made Sarah's heart ache with its beauty. She stood motionless, not wanting to interrupt. The music spoke of longing, of connection to something greater than oneself, of sorrows transformed but not forgotten. When the final note faded into silence, Sarah remained still, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Tall Feather lowered the flute, seeming unsurprised by her presence. He gestured to the space beside him on the rock. Sarah sat, their shoulders nearly touching in the gathering darkness. Beautiful, she said simply. Old song, he replied, for calling spirits of ancestors. They sat in comfortable silence as stars multiplied above them. Sarah had never seen a sky so vast, so brilliantly populated with light. In Boston, buildings and smoke had obscured all but the brightest stars. My people believe stars are ancestors, Tall Feather said, pointing to a particular cluster. That group's 7 sisters. Very old story. The Pleiades, Sarah said, recognizing the formation. We have stories about them too. Tall Feather looked at her with interest. What stories? Sarah struggled to remember the Greek myths from her school days. 7 sisters? Pursued by a hunter. They asked the gods for help and were placed in the sky for protection. Not so different, Tall Feather said thoughtfully. Our story tells of 7 maidens pursued by a bear. Great Spirit lifted them to sky for safety. They exchanged more stories as the night deepened, Apache legends of the constellations and European myths, finding surprising commonalities between their traditions. The stars wheeled slowly overhead as they talked, their voices soft in the eye. Vast silence of the desert night. When a chill wind arose, they moved inside, where the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Tall Feather added small sticks, nursing the flames back to life. In the flickering light, he showed Sarah his flute, explaining how each one was made specifically for its owner. Cedar knows the breath, he said, running his fingers along the Smooth wood. Remember songs even when not played. He held it out to her. Hesitantly, Sarah accepted the instrument, aware of the honor being extended. She raised it to her lips, attempting to mimic his technique. Her first breath produced only a whispered rush of air. Tall Feather's hands covered hers, adjusting her finger positions. Gentle, he instructed, like speaking to friend. Sarah tried. Again, and this time a clear note emerged, followed by another. Nothing like Tall Feather's skilled playing, but music nonetheless. The smile that transformed his usually solemn face made her heart beat faster. Good, he said, his hands lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. When she returned the flute, their fingers touched, and neither pulled away immediately. Something was changing between them, a shift as gradual and inevitable as the turning seasons dot in the days that followed. Sarah often found Tall Feather playing his flute in the evenings. Sometimes she sat quietly, listening. Other times he would teach her simple melodies, his patience endless as she struggled to master the techniques. On a particularly clear night, he played a song he hadn't shared before, lighter, almost playful, compared to his usual melodies. Happy song, Sarah observed when he finished. Tall Feather nodded. Courting song, he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Young man plays for woman he admires. The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. In that moment of silent acknowledgement, boundaries of culture, circumstance, and physical condition seemed to dissolve, leaving only two people connected by something neither had expected to find. Later, writing in her journal by firelight, Sarah tried to capture the melody he had played, creating her own notation system. Beside the musical notes, she wrote, "Tonight, something unnamed but real exists between us. I should feel afraid or ashamed of these feelings. Instead, I feel only that I am exactly where I am meant to be." The first frost came with the full moon, painting the landscape silver under its cold light. Sarah woke to find delicate ice, crystals adorning the dwelling's entrance, a beautiful warning of the season's turning. She had fashioned a calendar of sorts on a piece of deerskin, marking the passing days with charcoal. According to her calculations, it was early November far, later than she had realized. Winter comes, Tall Feather confirmed when he saw her studying the frost. Snow soon on mountains, then here. They worked with renewed urgency, completing winter preparations. Sarah constructed a small pen for Bessie, adjacent to the dwelling, incorporating a covered area to protect the cow from snow and wind. Tall Feather showed her how to make proper winter moccasins, his fingers deftly guiding hers as she learned to stitch the soft deerskin. "Your hands learn quickly," he observed as she completed her first pair. "Good memory in fingers." Sarah smiled at the compliment. "I had to learn many needlework skills in Boston. Different materials, same principles." Their shoulders touched as they worked side by side, a casual intimacy that had become comfortable between them. Sarah noticed how Tall Feather no longer shifted away from such contact as he once had. Instead, he seemed to welcome these brief connections, his hand brushing hers when passing tools, their fingers meeting over shared tasks. One morning, Sarah noticed dark shapes moving across the distant landscape. "Visitors?" she asked, pointing. Tall Feather's expression grew serious as he studied the approaching figures. "Hunting party," he confirmed. "My tribe." 5 riders approached the dwelling, their faces painted for hunting. They greeted Tall Feather with respect, but regarded Sarah with open suspicion. Unlike the previous visitors, these men were younger, their demeanor more aggressive. The leader dismounted and spoke rapidly to Tall Feather, gesturing occasionally toward Sarah. Though she couldn't understand most words, the tension was unmistakable. When the conversation grew heated, Sarah moved closer to Tall Feather, wanting to demonstrate her allegiance. One of the hunters noticed the eagle feather, now woven into Sarah's hair-tall feathers gift. He spoke sharply, pointing to it with evident disapproval. Tall Feather's response was calm but firm, his hand making a cutting motion that seemed to end that line of discussion. Finally, the leader addressed Sarah directly in halting English. White soldiers come from east. Many. Fights. Bad time for white woman alone with our people. Sarah lifted her chin. I am not alone. I am with Tall Feather. A man's eyes narrowed. He is respected elder. We worry for his safety. White people not trust Indian with white woman. The implication was clear her presence could bring danger to Tall Feather if settlers or soldiers discovered them. I would never bring harm to him, Sarah said firmly. The man translated her words for the others, who exchanged skeptical glances. More discussion followed before the hunting party departed, leaving behind a freshly killed deer as a gift or perhaps as a test of Sarah's reaction to their customs. When they were alone again, Sarah helped Tall Feather prepare the deer, following his instructions for proper butchering and preservation. She worked without hesitation or squeamishness, determined to show her respect for Apache ways. They fear for you, she said as they worked, because of me. Tall Feather's hands remained steady. They do not understand. What did they say about the feather? In my hair? He paused briefly. Eagle feather is honor. Some think you not earn it yet. Have I? Sarah asked quietly. Tall Feather's dark eyes met hers. In my eyes, yes. That night, after the meat had been properly stored, Sarah added a new mark to her calendar. Then, on impulse, she drew a small dwelling beside it, a permanent mark. Not the temporary notation she had been using to count days until departure. Tall Feather watched her from across the fire. You stay for winter, he observed. It wasn't. A question. Sarah nodded. I stay for winter, she confirmed. Then, more softly, perhaps longer. The smile that briefly touched his lips was like the first time she had heard his flute, unexpected and deeply moving. Outside, the wind carried the first few snowflakes, dancing them past the dwelling's entrance like tiny messengers announcing winter's arrival. Inside, the fire cast warm light on two people from different worlds who had, against all odds, created a shared one. Winter settled fully upon the land, transforming the desert into a landscape of austere beauty. Snow blanketed the earth, reserving warmth beneath its crystalline surface, while reflecting the sun's pale light above. Inside the well-insulated dwelling, Sarah and Tall Feather maintained a comfortable existence. Their daily routines adjusted to accommodate the harsher conditions. On a particularly cold morning, Sarah decided to organize the dwelling's storage area while Tall Feather worked on crafting new arrows. As she carefully arranged dried herbs and foodstuffs, her hand dislodged a loose stone in the wall, revealing a small hidden cavity behind it. Curious, Sarah reached inside and felt something. Wrapped in oiled leather, she withdrew the package carefully, unwrapping it to reveal several items. A worn leather pouch containing dried tobacco, a small knife with an ornately carved handle, and something that made her breath catch, a tarnished brass button bearing the insignia of the United States Army. Sarah stared at the button, turning it over in her palm. Its presence among Tall Feather's possessions made no sense. Apache tribes had been in conflict with the army for decades. Why would he keep such an item? And why hide it? She was still holding the button when Tall Feather entered the storage area. He froze at the sight of the exposed cavity and the items in Sarah's hands, his face becoming instantly unreadable. I'm sorry, Sarah said quickly. I found it by accident when the stone came loose. Tall Feather said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on the button in her palm. The silence stretched between them, suddenly uncomfortable in a way it hadn't been for weeks. This is an army button, Sarah finally said, holding it up. Why do you have it? Tall Feather moved his travois to the main room of the dwelling, clearly expecting Sarah to follow. When they were seated by the fire, he took the button from her hand, studying it with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Long story?" he said eventually. "Not good story." "I'd like to hear it," Sarah said gently, "if you're willing to tell me." Tall Feather was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might refuse. Then he reached for his medicine pouch, withdrew a pinch of sacred herbs, and cast them into the fire. The fragrant smoke rose between them as he began to speak. 20 winters passed, he said, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that suggested he was translating an oft-told narrative. Young warrior, strong legs then. Army men come to Apache land. Need scouts who know mountains, water places. Sarah listened intently as Tall Feather described how he had served as a scout for the U.S. Army, guiding them through territories his people had known for generations. He had believed the officers' promises of fair treatment for cooperative tribes, had trusted that his service would help secure peace and land rights for his people. "I wear blue coat," he said, miming the uniform. "Learn English words. Ride with soldiers." "You were a scout," Sarah said, beginning to understand. "But what happened?" Tall Feather's face darkened. "New officer come. Yellow hair. No honor man. Say Apache scouts no longer needed. Say all Apaches same enemy." With careful words and gestures, Tall Feather described the betrayal. After using Apache scouts to learn the terrain and water sources, the new commander had ordered them disarmed and imprisoned, planning to use the information they'd provided to track down and relocate their tribes. "Night comes, I escape, take horse, ride to warn my people." His hands gripped his useless legs. "Soldiers follow, shoot, horse fall in canyon. I fall too." Sarah covered her mouth, horror dawning. "Your injury, it wasn't in battle with another tribe." Tall Feather shook his head. "Army bullets. My own people find me, bring to healer. But legs never wake again." "And the button?" Sarah asked softly. "Keep. To remember," he said, his voice hardening. "Remember, never trust white man words." The irony of his statement hung between them. He who had come to trust her, a white woman. Sarah felt shame burn through her, not personal guilt, but the weight of her people's actions. "I returned to tribe," Tall Feather continued. "Some call me traitor, say I'll help blue coats. Others defend. Many arguments. I choose to live alone. Better for all." Sarah understood now why he had separated himself from his people. Not just because of his disability, but because of their divided opinions about his service to the army. He had been caught between two worlds, trusted by neither fully. "And now," she said hesitantly, "you have a white woman in your home." Tall Feather's revelation created a fragile tension between them. Though neither mentioned the button again, its discovery had shifted something fundamental in their relationship. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of her identity as a white settler, wondering if Tall Feather saw inner echoes of those who had betrayed him. For his part, Tall Feather seemed withdrawn, spending long hours in solitary tasks, his flute silent. In the evenings, the easy companionship they had developed gave way to careful politeness that hurt Sarah more than outright rejection would have. Week of heavy snow kept them confined to the dwelling, the enforced proximity making their emotional distance all the more painful. Sarah was tending the fire one afternoon when urgent voices outside broke the silence. Tall Feather moved quickly to the entrance, opening it to reveal 2 young Apache men, their horses steaming in the cold air. The visitors spoke rapidly to Tall Feather, one of them presenting an intricately carved wooden staff. Sarah recognized it as a tribal elder's symbol of authority. Tall Feather accepted it with evident surprise, questioning the messengers in their shared language, though Sarah couldn't understand the words. The gravity of the situation was clear from the messenger's demeanor. When they departed, Tall Feather sat by the fire, the staff across his lap, his expression troubled. "What's happened?" Sarah asked, setting aside her work. "Tribal council," Tall Feather explained. "Elder summons me." "Is something wrong?" He nodded slowly. "Army comes. Big force. Say all Apache must go to reservation land far south." Sarah's heart sank. Forced relocations had been happening across the territories for years, always with devastating consequences for native peoples. Your tribe is resisting? Council must decide. Fight, hide, or go. Tall Feather ran his fingers along the carved staff. Elder asks my words because I know White Army ways. When must you go to them? Tomorrow. Snowpath now clear enough. Sarah nodded, already calculating what provisions he would need for the journey. I'll help you prepare. Tall Feather studied her face. Journey difficult. 3 days to council place. I understand, she said, though the thought of their separation, their first since she had arrived, filled her with unease. You come too, he said unexpectedly. Sarah looked up in surprise. Me? To a tribal council? Tall Feather nodded. You know white ways, maybe help understand army thoughts. It was a practical suggestion, but Sarah sensed something more beneath. A desire not to be parted, perhaps, or an unwillingness to leave her alone with winter's dangers. The next morning, they set out Tall Feather on a specially constructed travois pulled by one of the messenger's horses that had been left. For him, Sarah riding Bessie, who proved a surprisingly capable mount. They traveled slowly but steadily, making camp each night in sheltered locations. Tall Feather knew from his scouting days. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge to find a large encampment spread below them. Dozens of dwellings arranged in a traditional circle, smoke rising from cooking fires. Children played in the snow, while adults moved purposefully about various tasks. It was Sarah's first glimpse of Apache community life, and the vitality of it struck her forcefully. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People emerged from dwellings, pointing and calling to one another. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of suspicious gazes as she dismounted from Bessie. A murmur ran through the crowd when they noticed Tall Feather's travois and the elder's staff. He carried an elderly man emerge from the central dwelling, his face deeply lined, his bearing regal despite stooped shoulders. He approached Tall Feather first, exchanging formal greetings, then turned his penetrating gaze on Sarah. White woman, he said in surprisingly clear English. Why you come to Apache Council? Before Sarah could respond, Tall Feather spoke. She is Naivsh Ibiku G, he said firmly. Wind traveler. She lives in my dwelling, helps me prepare for winter, knows healing plants, respects Apache ways. The elder's eyebrows rose at the Apache name Tall Feather had given her, the first time Sarah had heard it. The name itself was a declaration of her acceptance, a recognition of her journey to their world. And why you bring outsider to council? About army threat? The elder pressed. She knows white minds, Tall Feather replied. Maybe see things we cannot see. The elder studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded once. Council begins at sunset. Both will attend. He turned to address the gathered tribe. Prepare place for Tall Feather and Wind Traveler. As they were led to a small dwelling set aside for them, Sarah whispered, Wind Traveler? Tall Feathers. Eyes held a warmth that had been missing since the button's discovery. Name came to me in dream. Fitzhugh. In that moment, with her new name still resonating between them, the distance of recent days seemed to diminish, though the challenges ahead loomed larger than ever. The council fire cast long shadows across the faces of the gathered Apache leaders. Sarah sat slightly behind Tall Feather, acutely aware of her status as an outsider, permitted to witness something few white people had ever seen. The tribal elder whose name she learned was Stans, with Mountain presided over the gathering with dignified authority. The initial discussions were conducted entirely in Apache, with Tall Feather occasionally translating crucial points for Sarah in whispered English. The situation, she learned, was dire. Army representatives had delivered an ultimatum. The tribe must relocate to designated reservation lands within 2 weeks or face forced removal. Some warriors want to fight, Tall Feather explained quietly. Others say many will die, especially children and elders. Sarah listened intently, studying the animated expressions of those who spoke. Though she couldn't understand the words, she recognized the universal language of fear, anger, and determination. When a heated debate broke out between two faction leaders, Sarah leaned forward. "What are they arguing about?" she whispered. "Army. Paper," Tall Feather replied. "Treaty words. No one here reads English writing." A document was being passed around the circle, an official-looking paper with elaborate script and a government seal. As Sarah watched the leaders examine it with suspicious bewilderment, an idea formed. "I can read it," she said, her voice louder than intended. The discussion halted abruptly, all eyes turning to her. Stans with Mountain regarded her with a measuring gaze. "White woman reads paper words," Sarah nodded. "I was educated in Boston. I can tell you what it says." After a brief consultation, Stans with Mountain gestured for the document to be brought to her. Sarah accepted it with steady hands, conscious of the weight of responsibility. The treaty was typical government legalese, filled with formal language, designed to confuse rather than clarify. "It says the tribe must vacate these lands by December 15th, she began, translating the key points into simple English that Tall Feather could then interpret for the others. "In exchange, you're promised land in the Southern Territory, provisions for 1 year, and," she frowned, rereading a particular paragraph, "and protection from other tribes, though you must surrender all weapons except those needed for hunting." A murmur ran through the assembly as Tall Feather translated. One warrior spoke sharply, gesturing toward Sarah with obvious distrust. "He thinks you lie to help White Army," Tall Feather explained. Sarah looked directly at the skeptical warrior. "I understand your suspicion," she said, knowing Tall Feather would translate. "But I have no reason to help those who would force you from your ancestral lands. My loyalties to Tall Feather and his people who have shown me kindness." Her words seemed to soften some expressions, though others remained doubtful. "Stands with." Mountain studied her thoughtfully before speaking again. "If woman speaks true, treaty is trap. No weapons means no defense." Sarah nodded. "In my experience, such promises are rarely kept in full. The provisions often never arrive, or are insufficient." Further discussion followed, with Sarah answering questions about white settlers' intentions and army tactics. As the night deepened, a plan began to emerge. Not outright resistance, which would be suicidal, but neither complete submission. "Council thinks maybe negotiate better terms," Tall Feather explained. "Need someone who speaks both languages, understands both ways." All eyes turned to Sarah again, and she suddenly understood what was being proposed. "You want me to help negotiate?" "With the army?" Stands with Mountain nodded solemnly. "Wind Traveler walks in both worlds, can speak our words to white ears." The responsibility terrified her, but Sarah squared her shoulders. "I will try, if you believe it will help." Later, as the council dispersed for the night, Tall Feather and Sarah returned to their assigned dwelling. The small space felt intimate after the crowded council. "This is dangerous," she said quietly, "for both of us." Tall Feather nodded. "All paths now have danger. If I speak for your people, the army may consider me a traitor. And if I bring White Woman to speak, some Apache thinks same of me." His eyes held hers steadily. "We already choose our path. Sarah sank down beside him, suddenly overwhelmed. What if I fail? The consequences. No promise of success, Tall Feather acknowledged. But Wind Traveler has strong heart, sees with clear eyes. His faith in her was both bolstering and frightening. Sarah thought of the hidden military button, the history of betrayal that haunted their people's interactions. Do you trust me? She asked suddenly. Truly trust me, even knowing what other white people have done to you? Tall Feather was silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movement, he reached for her hand. Trust is like seed, he said. Must plant first, then see what grows. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Apache encampment. Sarah emerged from their dwelling to find the community already in motion, women preparing food, men readying horses, children carrying water and firewood under watchful supervision. Despite the looming threat, daily life continued with practiced efficiency. A group of women approached Sarah, led by an elderly matriarch whose deeply lined face bore tattoos marking her high status. She carried a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. I am Many Blankets, she introduced herself in halting English. Mother of Stands with Mountain, we bring gift for Wind Traveler. Sarah accepted the bundle with appropriate solemnity. Unwrapping it, she found a beautifully crafted dress of supple deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork and porcupine quillwork in geometric patterns. For council meeting with white soldiers, Many Blankets explained. You speak for Apache. People should wear Apache clothes. The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Sarah. This wasn't merely practical attire, it was symbolic acceptance, acknowledgement of her role as cultural intermediary. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. I'm honored. Many Blankets nodded, her weathered face softening slightly. Come, we help you dress proper way. Sarah followed the women to a separate dwelling, where they assisted her in donning the traditional garment. The dress fit surprisingly well, the leather soft against her skin. As they worked, the women taught her Apache words for various items of clothing, correcting her pronunciation with good-natured patience. When they finished, one woman produced a polished piece of metal that served as a mirror. Sarah barely recognized herself. The woman reflected back seemed to belong to both. Worlds yet entirely to neither her pale features and light hair, contrasting with the distinctly Apache clothing. Good, Many Blankets declared. Now you're ready for Women's Circle. Sarah spent the morning with the tribe's women, learning their methods of food preparation and preservation. Though language barriers remained, she found herself welcomed into their activities, her willingness to learn appreciated. Occasionally she caught curious glances from children, who whispered and giggled when she noticed their attention not by midday. Word spread through the camp army representatives would arrive the following morning for preliminary discussions. Council reconvened to prepare their negotiation strategy. With Sarah's active participation, now expected rather than merely tolerated, what leverage do we have? She asked Tall Feather during a break in the discussions. The army holds most of the power here. Tall Feather considered this. Knowledge of mountains. Winter coming. Army cannot find people who don't want to be found in deep snow. So the threat is that if terms aren't acceptable, the tribe could disappear into the mountains until spring? He nodded. Many caches of food. Already hidden. Old One's children could survive winter in secret places. It was a desperate strategy, but not without merit. The army would be reluctant to commit resources to a prolonged winter campaign in unfamiliar terrain. As discussions continued, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn into the role of advisor. Her suggestions about phrasing demands in terms the military would respect were met with thoughtful consideration. By sunset, a clear approach had been formulated, one that emphasized the practical benefits of allowing the tribe to remain on a portion of their current territory rather than forcing a costly and potentially bloody relocation. When the council concluded, Stands with Mountain approached Sarah and Tall Feather. "Tomorrow you will speak our words to army men," he told Sarah. "Tonight you prepare in spirit way." He led them to a small lodge set apart from the others, where aromatic cedar burned in a central fire pit. "Sweat Lodge prayer," Tall Feather explained quietly. "Purify body and thoughts before important task." Sarah hesitated, unsure of the protocol for such a sacred ritual. "I am not of your people," she said to Stands with Mountain. "Is it appropriate for me to participate?" The elder studied her face. "Wind Traveler walks new path. Not Apache, not white. Spirit world understands new paths." He gestured toward the lodge. "Women prepare separate lodge for you." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in Sarah's experience. The intense heat, the rhythmic chanting, the profound sense of communal purpose transcending individual concerns. Many blankets guided her through the women's rituals with grandmotherly patience, explaining the significance of each element. Later, emerging into the cool night air, Sarah felt strangely renewed. Her anxieties about the coming confrontation not eliminated, but transformed into focused resolve. She found Tall Feather waiting near their dwelling, his face still damp from his own ceremony. "You feel ready?" he asked. Sarah touched the soft leather of her new dress, then reached for the eagle feather she had carefully incorporated into her braided hair. "I feel clear," she replied, "like looking through still water to stones beneath." Tall Feather nodded in understanding. Good medicine for hard task. As they sat together beneath the star-filled sky, a messenger approached. "A run. Riders coming," he reported breathlessly. "Not army. White settlers with guns." Many angry voices. The encampment transformed within minutes, women hurrying children into dwellings, men taking up defensive positions, horses being moved to protected areas. Stands with Mountain ordered no aggressive action, but the tension was palpable as the riders approached. Through the gathering darkness, Sarah counted a dozen men on horseback, their rifles clearly visible. They halted at a cautious distance, and one rider separated from the group, advancing slowly with a lantern raised. "We're looking for the army camp," the man called out. "Supposed to rendezvous with Captain Hollister's company." Sarah glanced at Tall Feather, whose face had gone completely still at the name. Before she could question him, Stands with Mountain nodded to her. "You speak. Safer from white woman." Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward into the lantern light, conscious of her Apache dress and what it would communicate to the settlers. "The army hasn't arrived yet," she called. "They're expected tomorrow morning." The rider reined his horse sharply, clearly startled by her appearance. "Good Lord, you're a white woman. Are you a captive? Do you need help?" "I'm not a captive," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm here by choice as an interpreter." Murmurs ran through the group of riders. The spokesman dismounted, approaching cautiously. As he drew closer, Sarah could see he was a middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face and the practical clothing of a rancher. "Name's Garrett Wilson," he introduced himself. "Got a small spread about 20 miles east. The Army's requisitioned U.S. as guides for their operation against these hostiles." "They're not hostiles," Sarah corrected. "This band has been peaceful. They're being asked to relocate to reservation land." Wilson's expression suggested skepticism. "Ma'am, begging your pardon, but you don't look like any official interpreter I ever saw. What's your name?" "Sarah Mitchell." Recognition flickered across Wilson's face. "Mitchell? From the Callahan wagon train?" "Lady, they've been saying you were dead these past months." Sarah hadn't considered that news of her disappearance might have spread. "As you can see, I'm very much alive. I've been living with—" She hesitated, uncertain how to characterize her relationship with Tall Feather, with friends. Wilson shook his head in disbelief. "Well, this complicates things. Captain Hollister ain't gonna like finding a white." Woman living among the Apache, especially not dressed like that. The name struck Sarah again. Captain Hollister, he's leading the relocation operation? Yes, ma'am. Transferred in from the Dakota Territory about a month back. Man with a reputation for getting results with troublesome tribes. Behind her, Sarah heard Tall Feather's soft intake of breath. She turned to find him signaling her urgently to return to the Apache line. Mr. Wilson, she said, making a quick decision, please tell your men to make camp at the eastern edge of the valley tonight. It would be best if you didn't approach the Apache encampment again until the army arrives. Wilson studied her face. You sure you're not being coerced, ma'am? Blink twice if you need rescuing. I assure you, I'm here of my own free will, Sarah said firmly. There are delicate negotiations planned for tomorrow. Your presence complicates matters. After Wilson reluctantly agreed and led his men away, Sarah hurried back to Tall Feather. His face was drawn with tension. Hollister, he said, the name, coming out like a curse. Yellow hair. Understanding dawned. The officer who betrayed you. Who's responsible for your injury? Tall Feather nodded grimly. Same man, bad spirit. Stands with Mountain joined them, sensing the new complication. What trouble comes? Sarah explained the situation rapidly, watching the elder's face grow increasingly grave. This changes path, he said finally. If this yellow hair knows Tall Feather, sees white woman in Apache dress, his anger will be great. I should leave, Tall Feather said unexpectedly. My presence brings danger to tribe. No, Sarah said firmly. Running solves nothing. We need to face this together. A plan began forming in her mind, risky, but potentially powerful. Tomorrow, I'll meet with Hollister first, alone, as Sarah Mitchell, the lost settler. I'll establish myself as a neutral party before revealing my connection to your people. Stands with Mountain considered this. Dangerous game. Yes, Sarah acknowledged. But if Hollister recognizes Tall Feather before we've established any rapport, negotiations will fail before they begin. That night, as the encampment settled into uneasy vigilance, Sarah and Tall Feather sat in their dwelling, speaking in low voices. She had changed back into her settler clothing, a strategic decision for the morning's encounter. I will wear his medal, Tall Feather said suddenly, reaching for a small pouch. The one he gave me when I saved his life, before betrayal. From the pouch, he withdrew a tarnished medal of commendation, bearing the clear insignia of a military decoration. Remember his words when he needs to. Dawn revealed a new encampment established on the valley's eastern edge. The army had arrived during the night. Canvas tents stood in precise rows, the American flag flying from a central pole. Mounted soldiers patrolled the perimeter, while others tended to horses and equipment with military efficiency. Sarah approached alone, dressed in her settler clothes, but with the eagle feather tucked discreetly in her pocket. She had rehearsed her story carefully with Tall Feather and Stands with Mountain, a version of truth with strategic omissions. The sentry stopped her, rifles raised cautiously until she identified herself. Within minutes, she was escorted to the largest tent where Captain James Hollister awaited. The man who rose to greet her matched Tall Feather's description, perfectly tall and broad-shouldered with pale blonde hair that had earned him his Apache nickname. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying the refined accent of East Coast military academies. We'd heard you were lost months ago. Finding you alive is quite unexpected. Sarah maintained a composed demeanor despite her racing heart. The Apache band found me near death from dehydration, Captain. They saved my life and have treated me with nothing but kindness. Hollister's blue eyes narrowed slightly. Stockholm sympathies are common among captives, Mrs. Mitchell. You're safe. Now you can speak freely. I was never a captive, Sarah corrected firmly. And I'm not here to be rescued. I'm here as an interpreter for the tribal council. The captain's face hardened. I see. And does this arrangement have something to do with your unconventional attire yesterday? Mr. Wilson reported you were dressed as an Apache woman. I've learned their ways out of respect and necessity, Sarah replied evenly. It's helped me gain their trust, which is why I'm in a position to assist with negotiations. Hollister studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Mitchell, these negotiations are a formality. The relocation orders come directly from Washington. My job is to ensure compliance, not negotiate terms. Nevertheless, Sarah persisted, I believe there's room for compromise that would benefit both sides. The tribe is willing to consider alternatives to complete relocation. A muscle twitched in Hollister's jaw. Very well. I'll hear their proposals, though I make no promises. Bring their representatives at midday. Sarah returned to the Apache encampment, where Tall Feather and the council awaited her report. He's agreed to meet, she told them. But he's made it clear the relocation order is firm. Stands Mountain nodded gravely. We expected no less. Now we show him cost of forcing us. The diplomatic party that assembled was carefully chosen Stands Mountain for his authority, too respected. Warriors for protection, and Tall Feather, whose presence had been hotly debated. In the end, they had agreed his knowledge of both cultures was too valuable to exclude. Despite the risk of Hollister recognizing him, Sarah walked beside Tall Feather as they approached the army camp, his travois pulled by a strong young warrior who had volunteered for the task. The Medal of Commendation was prominently displayed on Tall Feather's chest, its brass surface polished to catch the sunlight. Hollister waited outside his tent, flanked by officers. His expression remained impassive until his gaze fell on Tall Feather. Recognition, disbelief, and something like fear flashed across his face in rapid succession. That's impossible, he muttered, stepping forward. You're dead. Tall Feather met his gaze steadily. Not dead, changed. The captain regained his composure quickly, addressing Sarah with forced casualness. You failed to mention you had a former Army scout among your friends, Mrs. Mitchell. Former scout, Tall Feather corrected, his voice stronger than Sarah. Had ever heard it. Former trusted guide. Former man who saved Captain's life in canyon ambush. He touched the medal. Captain, remember? A flush crept up Hollister's neck. That was before you violated your oath and fled with military intelligence. After. You order Apache scouts imprisoned, Tall Feather countered. After you break word of honor. The tension was palpable as the two men faced each other, one standing in the full authority of military power, the other seated, but no less formidable in his moral authority. Sarah stepped between them. Gentlemen, we're here to discuss the future, not relitigate the past. Stands Mountain moved forward, speaking in carefully practiced English. My people offer compromise. We keep land near sacred mountains. Army keeps land near river and new railroad. No fighting. No death of soldiers or Apache children. Hollister's face remained hard. My orders are clear complete relocation to the designated reservation. Orders based on lies, Tall Feather said quietly. No Apache attacks on settlers. This season, peaceful hunting only. Captain, Sarah interjected, I've been living among these people. They're not the hostiles your reports claim. A forced relocation would be both unjust and unnecessary. Hollister's eyes narrowed. And what exactly is your stake in this, Mrs. Mitchell? Why would a Boston widow care so deeply about the fate of an Apache band? The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Sarah glanced at Tall Feather, drawing strength from his steady gaze. Because I've learned to see beyond the prejudices I was raised with, she said firmly. And because I've found a home and purpose here that I never had in Boston. 1 year later, Sarah stood at the entrance of their new dwelling, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The home she and Tall Feather had built stood at the boundary between worlds, close enough to the small settlement that had formed near the trading post to maintain connections there, yet positioned on ancestral Apache land that the tribe had managed to retain through the negotiations. Those negotiations had been tense, extending over weeks rather than days. Hollister had initially remained inflexible, but Sarah had played her final card letters to influential Boston connections, including her late husband's brother, who now sat on a congressional committee overseeing Indian affairs. The threat of scrutiny from Washington, combined with Tall Feather's damning testimony about past military misconduct, had eventually forced Hollister to accept a compromise. The solution wasn't perfect. The tribe had ceded valuable river land, but retained their sacred mountains and hunting grounds. In exchange, they agreed to limited oversight and established regular trading relationships with the new settlement. Most importantly, they remained a cohesive community rather than being scattered across distant reservations. Sarah's role as interpreter had expanded naturally into that of intermediary between cultures. Twice monthly, she traveled to the settlement to teach English to Apache children and basic Apache language and customs to interested settlers. Prejudices hadn't disappeared, but understanding had taken root in fertile ground. Tall Feather emerged from the dwelling to join her, moving with practiced ease on the improved travois he now used primarily outdoors. Inside their home, he navigated with remarkable agility, using handholds they had incorporated into the design. Thinking deep thoughts? He asked, his English now nearly fluent after months of daily practice. Sarah smiled, remembering how far we've come. In the pasture nearby, Bessie grazed contentedly alongside her yearling calf. The cow that had once been Sarah's last possession had become the cornerstone of a small dairy operation that provided milk and cheese to both the Apache community and nearby settlers. Their garden had expanded too, combining Tall Feather's medicinal plants with vegetables Sarah had introduced from settler varieties. The blending of agricultural traditions mirrored their personal journey, taking the best from both worlds to create something uniquely their own. Council fire tonight, Tall Feather reminded her. Stands with Mountain wants to discuss spring planting. Sarah nodded. I'll be ready soon. Their status within the tribe had evolved over the months. Initial suspicion had given way to acceptance and finally to respect. Sarah's Apache name, Wind Traveler, was now used commonly. Her identity, as a white woman less relevant than her demonstrated commitment to the community's welfare. For Tall Feather, the journey had been equally transformative. Once isolated by both disability and divided loyalties, he had reclaimed his place as a respected elder and healer. His dwelling, now their dwelling, had become a place where members of both communities could meet in neutral territory, seeking healing for bodies and, increasingly, for the divisions between their peoples. As twilight deepened around them, Tall Feather reached for something beside him, a small carved wooden ring he had been working on in secret moments. Made this, he said, holding it out to her, from cedar tree near Healing Spring. Sarah accepted it with a caught breath, recognizing the intricate Apache symbols carved around its circumference: protection, unity, and eternal connection. It's beautiful, she whispered. In Boston, Tall Feather said carefully, man gives woman ring when asking for life partnership. Sarah smiled at his formal phrasing. Yes, and among your people, man proves worth through actions first. Words come after. His dark eyes held hers steadily. I hope actions have shown my heart. Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger. It's smooth. Wood warm against her skin. They have. More eloquently than any words could. Their hands joined naturally, fingers intertwining his darker skin against her paler tone, both equally marked by the work and weather of desert life. In the distance, a council fire flared to life, sending sparks toward the emerging stars. Soon they would join the gathering, taking their places in the community they had helped preserve. But for this moment, they remained in the space between not fully of either world, but creating their own. The path ahead won't be easy, Sarah said softly. There will always be those who cannot accept what we've built. Tall Feather nodded. All important paths have stones. We remove what we can, step carefully around others. As darkness settled fully around them, they moved toward the council fire, she walking steadily beside his travois, matched in pace and purpose, despite their different modes of travel. Behind them, their dwelling stood as testament to possibility. Ah, place where divided worlds could meet and healing could begin, one shared story at a time.